else not working.
I know. I found that out yesterday. I think my voice is loud enough without needing microphone. Well, thanks for coming along this afternoon. This is as advertised, introduction to Buddhism. So I thought I might just start and then give a bit of background, and then then we can have some questions or whatever. Don't have to be too formal. Okay, so I'm Thubten Chökyi. I'm the resident teacher here at Hayagriva. And Venerable Thubten here, and then Rob, who probably greeted you on your way in, volunteering today. So, where to start? Well, I'll start with acknowledging the Whadjuk Noongar people of the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, who cared for this land since time immemorial, so we can live, work and thrive here, and extend that respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples everywhere. In terms of Buddhism, I think the most frequently asked question I have is Buddhism a religion? And I think that question comes because there's no God, Allah figure. So that, of course, you're probably familiar, I think everyone's familiar with the representation of the Buddha, like this statue behind me. And so, of course, it is a religion. And then people say, is it a philosophy? And you say, well, yes. Is it a science? Well, yes. Right. So every answer is yes, basically. A way of life, yes. But then we can look at all religions, all faiths, whatever, as being a way of life, so that, we follow a particular philosophy. And the Buddha, taught within the framework of a particular philosophy that was unique at the time. I have to say at the time, because these days I think, isn't it rather evident? And that philosophy was dependent arising, that everything is interdependent, basically, everything at every level. Like there's no just random events, or everything has causes and conditions. So that is the philosophical view. And the other thing is, and this, I guess, where it comes into how we act in the world, is to do no harm. In Sanskrit, it's ahimsa, which also Mahatma Gandhi made the practice of non-violence, quite famous. And so this no harm is not just to other fellow human beings, but to any being. And then you extend that out to the environment and so forth. And then you realize how it's easy to say, but difficult to do. So in any case, the Buddha lived in India in 2,600 odd years ago. And he was actually born in Lumbini, which these days is in Nepal. Nepal wasn't there then, but in Nepal, that's where he was born. But then he lived in Bihar state, which was the poorest, and still is the poorest state in India. I mean, just by the by. And so he was born into a wealthy family in terms of his father was the king of that area. I always think it's like Europe today, where you have all these little kingdoms and princedoms or whatever they're called. Anyway, the little ones. So it was like that. He was of the Shakyamuni Buddha, so of the Shakya clan. That was his clan. And when he was born, there were all these unusual signs that said that he was going to certainly he was going to be a significant worldly leader, but most likely a spiritual leader. And his dad, being the king, wanted to bring him into the family business. So he didn't want him to go off and be a spiritual leader. He wanted him to be a worldly leader, so that he was isolated in his sort of palatial abode, with his family. The family didn't want to let him see signs of sickness and suffering and so forth, because they knew that inevitably that would move his heart into be wanting to pursue the spiritual path. However, by the time he was 29, he did. Now, I should say, we debate everything. When I said it's a science, it's also very much within philosophy, it's logical. So when they say he didn't see in his first 29 years of his life any sickness, I want to know what sort of medical system they had. Or they just said, how can that be possible? He didn't see aging. I mean, he wasn't blind, you know.
I thought about that too, and I think it's that just anyone who's sick.
Moved them, isolated them, moved them out. Yes. Yeah. Anyway,
I can't think of any other one.
I love a good debate, so throw the questions up whenever you like. Anyway, so inevitably, due to his curiosity and wanting to learn more, he snuck out 4 times out of the palace. This was when he was 29. And he saw a sick person. Good afternoon. Welcome. Maybe this side. Yeah. Just getting started. So he saw a sick person. He saw an old person on a cane. He saw a corpse. He'd never seen a corpse before. And that I get. I mean, you can go through a lot of life without seeing actually face to face. I'm not talking about on the television. Well, they didn't have television. So, but a corpse. And I think fair enough, you could go for a fairly long time without seeing a corpse. And so realizing that all the cycles of life from birth to death are pervaded, we would say, by different forms of suffering, right? The suffering of birth itself, the suffering of sickness, the suffering of aging, the suffering of death. So following that, he was even more interested then to follow a spiritual path, and he left the palace and gave away all his princely goods and started wearing something like this, cut off his hair. And they're really symbols. We follow that today, like Buddhist. It's a Buddhist monks and nuns, so I'm a nun. We follow what the Buddha did in terms of, giving up any jewelry or whatever, not having the latest haircut, just simplifying things, and our clothing simplified. So just keep it simple, right? Not having a big wardrobe, things like that, to really simplify things and just, in a way, live with the, sort of minimalize, which is a lot of people minimalizing these days. We could show them how. Anyway, so the Buddha left the palace and he went on this sort of spiritual journey, which was about 6 years, and he met different teachers. We call them teachers. Because he was born in the Hindu tradition, so he was born a Brahmin, and it was only really at the time males of the Brahmin caste that could really take that sort of opportunity. If you were the merchant class, you were busy working, if you were, et cetera, and you didn't have access to this. But he was born in the lap of luxury, so which he then abandoned, and then just was one of these, what they were called, seeker after truth. And it was trying to find, well, what you could say on one level, what truly matters, but then what actually is true about how things exist, and not whether they exist. He wasn't nihilist, but how things exist and so forth, how things work. Anyway, so he did that for around 6 years. He had the best Hindu teachers that could take him a certain level, and that level, if you've heard like the name like nirvana or peace, bliss, where your mind's completely calm. So he reached that, and he knew there's something more, and that's when he went then to the place we now call Bodh Gaya, in still in Bihar state, and he sat under what we call the Bodhi tree, and he stayed there and meditated to try and gain what we call enlightenment, what the Buddha called being fully awake. So he sat there, and it said that in the first quarter of the night, he saw his own past lives. Second quarter, he saw all the past lives of other beings, so he knew where we were coming from and how to help. And then he overcame all the disturbing states of mind, our anger, our jealousies and prides and all of that. And in the morning, it said, he woke, he said, woke up, I'm awake, which we become a fully enlightened being, means getting rid of all the negative stuff and fully developing all your positive qualities. So that's really what being a Buddhist is about. Getting, not control of our mind, familiarizing with our mind, how to work with our mind through meditation and so forth, to first of all, to gain some level of control. So we're leading the mind's not leading us. We're not jumping around here and there all the time, even though we want to focus and concentrate. Our mind goes to, oh, there's a sound, oh, there's a smell, oh, that's interesting, blah, 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 blah. So within our Buddhist practice, it's about how we train our mind to stay focused, become more focused. And with that, we get more and more, literally, clarity. We see things clearly. And then on top of that, using logic, using analysis to, for example, one key teaching of the Buddha is the teaching on impermanence, that everything's subject to change. And there's certain things we don't want to change, right? No, don't want to change. I don't want that to change. But the Buddha said, we've all got to accept, and our minds will be much happier, and we would cause less conflict if we just accepted moment by moment by moment by moment, everything's changing. We don't really notice until, until your whole hair's white, that you'll go in. I had my first grey hairs at 19. I've heard people say younger. I only had 3. I pulled them out. That was all right. Then I dyed my hair for years. But anyway, no hair now. So things are momentarily changing. Everything is, Yes, our mind's changing moment by moment. And because our mind's changing moment by moment, we can train it. We can stop it getting caught up in all the toxic emotions, and that causes us, to have sleepless nights. It causes us to have conflicts with ourselves, with others, so forth. So we can rid ourselves of all of those. We actually can. That's what the Buddha demonstrated throughout his life. And we can develop all our positive qualities to their fullest, because the positive qualities, we could say, are in our true nature. Everything that's positive is in our true nature. Everything that's negative is like we've got very good at it, we're very habituated to it, but it's not our real nature. We can eliminate it. So the analogy is used like water. Water is H2O, hydrogen plus oxygen, right? In the right combination. Now, it can get polluted, but we can filter our water. So it's like that with the mind. We can filter out all the rubbish. And so this is what the Buddha's main teachings were about. Well, they were all about the mind, about understanding the mind, how our mind works. What are the different, we call them mental factors. What do we call the, sort of, we have sensory consciousness, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, tactility, skin, but our mental consciousness, and what are all the different bits we have there. Like one of the things, particularly within a Buddhist context, we talk about mindfulness. Actually, it's become a whole industry in the world, hasn't it? Mindfulness. Be mindful. Be mindful. What does that mean? So this is a training of the mind. At one level, it's training our mind to be present so that we can then observe when our mind's getting disturbed or so forth. And then we can, do something about that and not just be hijacked by disturbing emotions. So these are sort of like key parts of the Buddha's teachings. The very first teaching the Buddha gave after, when he arose from that meditation, we actually spent another 7 weeks around that area of Gaia, doing meditation practices. And then he thought, well, he wanted to, sort of share what he had learned. And he thought, I'll share that with my, great teachers I've had. And then found out that they'd passed away. And then he thought, oh, well, at the time he had been with a group of 5 others, seekers after truth. And so he thought, I'll go and share it with them, which is indeed what ended up happening. And so they probably became the first Buddhists. Because as my Hindu friends tell me, Buddha was not Buddhist. And I go, oh, no. Just like you say, Jesus Christ wasn't Christian. He was a Jew, like he was Jewish. I said, yeah, I know. He was Hindu. Everyone who came after, who took on his teachings, then they became Buddhists. So the first teaching he gave was, we called the 4 truths or the 4 noble truths. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it came from his observations when he left the palace and saw, birth, sickness, aging, death. He saw the ways in which all beings suffer. Because whether if you're a human or a non-human, an animal or an insect or whatever, there's still those 4 processes. And actually, because, people say, oh, you Buddhists are morbid, like you're always talking about suffering. But actually, what the Buddha, this word dukkha in Sanskrit, is dissatisfaction. So I think this we can relate to. We sort of, everything's not quite right. I'm not just content with what is. There's sort of this dis-ease, this dissatisfaction, which seems to pervade our life, yeah? Yeah. I'm not saying, at times, of course, we experience joy, we experience love, we experience all these wonderful things, but they don't last. And this, seems to go on, this dissatisfaction, discontent, a lot of the disses, right? And because that's a negative state of mind, then that causes us a whole bunch of other negative states of mind. When we don't get what we want, we get angry. So in general, what the Buddha said is that we live, like the world in which we live is called a desire realm. That's not hard to see. Like I say, I don't really desire much because, as I said, I sort of simplified my life, certainly by the time I ordained, and stripped back gave away a lot of stuff. But then you go to the shopping centre, it's half price only today, closing down, never to be seen again. Or it's just like, oh, I just might take a look. So we have this desire, our mind of desire gets easily triggered. Now, might be desire for what's on sale, or it might be desire for a person, or it might be desire, the latest U-Boot chocolate flavor, something, right? Music, we have, but all of those, because they're based on the senses, they can't last. Like, because, I remember a barista saying, after the first taste of coffee, after the first sip, are you a barista? Yeah. Then you don't taste the rest?
Yeah, you just want first 1 or 2 sips and then, yeah.
Yeah, first 1 or 2 sips. So go get a semi-demi test. Can't just have this much, please.
Chocolates.
I think everything's the same.
The first couple of little chunks and then.
Yeah, except like one of the favorite meditations, particularly with kids, is meditating on chocolate, where you say, first of all, you get a bit of chocolate and you smell it, and you take time, you slow down, the whole sort of slow food movement. Well, it's not the slow food, it's the slow eating. And you slow down, and then you smell it, and then you feel the texture, and you put it in your mouth, and you feel the texture in your mouth. You take time, right? And then you experience more and more. So you get more value for money that way. And I remember doing this meditation with a bunch of little ones, and check out with the parents, it's okay for them to have chocolate. And I passed the bag around and said, take as many as you like. And none of them, when we went through the meditation, it got through more than one little bit. Because then you're satisfied, right? So we don't really enjoy things even to their fullest, right? So anyway, so that's all based nonetheless on the senses. And even you enjoy it to the fullest, sometime later, you're going to get hungry, or, or you're going to want more, you're going to want different. This is how we work. And so the Buddha said, if we want to genuinely be happy, there is a genuine happiness that lasts forever, but it's not based on the senses. Because why? When we even I feel the only pleasant sensations for my whole life, and I haven't met anyone in that category, but only pleasant sensation my whole life. At some point, I'm going to leave the body behind, and they're based on that body that can smell and taste and touch and hear and see and whatever, and that's gone. So the Buddha said, then the main thing is the mind, that if we can work on the mind and get our mind in a more and more, first of all, calm state, and then develop all the positive qualities that will only give us more and more happiness, and they only grow more and more. So this is what the Buddha said, and so you can check that out for yourself. And because the mind is not physical, and this is where some of the debates come up. So the Dalai Lama, so we're in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Of course, the Dalai Lama is our big boss. And he's been since the early 80s meeting with mind scientists. So the mind sciences was the last frontier of science. I think did it start with archaeology or with astronomy? It might have started with astronomy. Anyway, you know what I mean. It started with material sciences. And since the mid-80s, the Dalai Lama has been meeting with physicists, neurosurgeons, brain scientists, mind scientists, psychologists, you get the drift, educators, to enhance and have dialogue about the understanding of mind. Hello, Mark. Good to see you. Grab a chair. And so what they're finding through the mind scientists, mind science, through their research, is what the Buddha taught. They're validating what the Buddha taught. Now it's got scientific reasoning behind it. It had reasoning, but, you know, we want scientific reasoning. But what was so difficult, and what continues to be so difficult, is because mind is not physical, you can't measure mind. And scientists love measurements. Anyone a scientist of any kind? What sort of scientist?
Medical science.
Medical science. You like measuring things, right? Quantifying things.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So because that's easier to do than trying to, the only way we can measure the mind transformation is by our own individual experience, which is exactly what the Buddha did. And then thought, hey, I can share this with others because I've achieved this state. So, but because of, you know, we'd say material sciences, there's always this debate of, well, the mind must be situated in the brain. Actually, if you go back, I haven't looked at Aristotle and those recently. Did you do those in any of your studies at all, Terry? No. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, they were always searching for where mind is. I think at one point it was in the spleen. Anyone remember? Anyway, it's a long time ago since I was at school. So there's always this, well, where is mind? And we say, well, mind is not physical. So mind is where mind is. Like if I think of London, I could say my mind is in London, or my idea of London, actually, it isn't in London, but, you know, my idea of London. So it just, you know, that if it's not physical, there's nothing constraining it. And this is where the Buddha talked about our infinite potential of the mind, that we can develop our mind to exquisite states beyond what we could ever imagine, beyond what we could ever imagine. And certainly when they've done the scientific tests on meditators, this is what they've discovered. I remember Mingyur Rinpoche and then Venerable Thubten Chökyi. They're the two names I know that, you know, with you having the electrodes on the brain to make measurements when they're meditating to determine their happiness factor. And they went off the scale. Sort of like the indicator went ding, 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 can't go any further because it's not measurable by what might be deemed as a normal state of happiness. So there are, you know, much more, we would say, subtle levels of mind that we can get to. Like when we dream, it's a more subtle level of mind. When we dream, it's not our physical body. There is a dream body there, dreaming, but, you know, so that's a more subtle level of mind certainly when we die, but I don't remember having died before, so I can't imagine that I had any control whatsoever on my mind. But you can develop your mind so that you can control the whole death process. And so the Buddha has this, from the Buddha's teachings, because mind is not physical, because it is non-physical, and that, remember I said everything's a dependent arising, causes and conditions. So this moment of mind, where did that come from? It's got to come from a previous moment of mind, the last moment, and that goes to the last moment. If we track back, we can track back our memories, say, of this life and see how far back we can track, not to relive all the highs and lows, I mean, go for it if you want, but to see how far back we can be aware. And this is where, as I said, the Buddha, when he sat under that Bodhi tree, which wasn't, it was a pipal, it was I think these days they call it figus religioso, or religiosi, something, yeah, you're right, Latin term, fig. We've got one out the back. So he sat there, and as I said, in the first quarter of his night, of the night, he saw all his own past lives. Now, to be able to do that is you've developed such clarity of your mind. There's nothing obscuring it. As the Buddha said, we're all pretty obscured. It gets pretty messy. You know, when our mind gets confused and we can't think straight and whatever, might happen many times a day. So it's sort of like we're living in this muddle all the time. But the more you can develop meditation practice, the more you can gain some awareness and then direct the mind where you want it, the more that clarity comes, so that we're able to see things more clearly, but also we can track back. And so in the other direction, so this is where the Buddha says, oh, we've had many lives, many lives. So he looked at his own past lives. In fact, he said, we've got beginningless past lives. And then going forward, and this is where, as Buddhists, we look to make the most of this life while we have all the positive conditions to develop ourselves on the spiritual path to carry that into future lives until we too are a Buddha. And because the Buddha demonstrated how to do that in that life he lived on earth, it sort of like set out the path of what to do. And so that becomes what we call the Dharma, the Buddha teachings. So like all of these, up these shelves here is Dharma texts. They're Tibetan ones. I can't read a word of Tibetan, so, you know, if you can, you're better than me. I keep having Tibetan lessons and not getting very far. Yeah, so they're the Tibetan ones. But of course, the Buddha taught in Pali, and then it was written down in Sanskrit. Eventually, in the 3rd century, it was written down in Sanskrit. So they're the teachings. And, you know, I do a lot of interfaith dialogue, work, whatever. I say work, but then it feels like work. It's not really work. It's my life. And, you know, people say, oh, you know, what's your Bible? What's your Quran? What's your Torah? And I go, well, there's 84,000 of them. You know, take your pick. There's quite a few texts. But fortunately, it all boils down to 2 things. Subdue your mind, like gain control of your mind so you can direct it where you want. So that's one thing. And the other thing is do no harm, which I said at the beginning, do no harm. So they're all the essence of all those teachings is those 2 things. Of course, we also, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, we do also a lot of study. I think what most people know about Buddhism is, oh, Buddhists meditate, right? Well, not just Buddhists meditate, but Buddhists do meditate. And we have very many different meditation practices. So there's 2 main schools of Buddhism. One is called, these days, the Theravadan. So if anyone's ever been to Serpentine or Dhammaloka or whatever, and Mahayana. So Mahayana, we follow within the Mahayana. So the goal within of a Theravadan practitioner is to attain that state, which was the first stage that the Buddha attained, which was that state of, we call liberation or nirvana, perfect peace, which is that state where your mind is completely free of all those disturbing emotions. And then within a Mahayana, so yana means vehicle, maha is great, great vehicle. There's another Sanskrit word, is we have the commitment go, well, that's all very nice for me, but what about everybody else who's still suffering? So then it's, I want to become a Buddha to, just like Shakyamuni Buddha did, then pass that on to help other beings. So, as the Buddha said, this, regardless of which path you follow, this is, this is the path for all beings to follow from start to finish. So there's no contradiction. We don't criticize other Buddhist teachings unless there's some shoddy business going on somewhere. They happen, even at the Buddha's time. But, inauthentic, I mean. So it's because, do no harm. We are all about harmony, peace, as you would expect. So for myself, like, I'm on committees with Ajahn Brahm, and I'm about there, and then we have, as Buddhism spread from that part of India, it first spread down like Burma, Sri Lanka, spread into like Vietnam, Cambodia, and then spread to Burma, and then spread into China and through to Japan. So we have Zen Buddhism there. And then lastly, spread into Tibet. And because Tibet was isolated from the rest of the world for so long, a lot of the teachings of the Buddha were preserved there. These days, it's a different story. But, up until the late 19th century, it was pretty much preserved, a lot of the teachings there. More recently, I've been really fascinated with Indonesia and how it sort of spread around there. So you could say the whole Asian diaspora, in a way, has the roots of some form of Buddhism, right? And so sometimes, we talk about Vietnamese Buddhism or Korean or whatever. It's really like the same. They're in that same Mahayana tradition that we are. It just gets to be a cultural difference, So it's not any different in terms of what the Buddha actually taught. So then, I think there's enough of a history lesson. Oh, I didn't even get through the Four Noble Truths, did I? Oh, sorry, the first teaching. I always think, if the Buddha was only going to teach one teaching, this was the first teaching, so it must be the most important one. And indeed, it's common across all forms of Buddhism. We all teach the Four Noble Truths pretty much in the same way. So the Four Noble Truths, when it says noble, what it means is, yes, they are truths. And keeping in mind that the Buddha was a seeker of truth. He wasn't a seeker of spirituality. He wasn't a seeker of religion. He was a seeker of truth. What is fact? What can be proven? In fact, the Buddha said, if you find anything I said, if you can prove it wrong, throw it out. I like that, because the Buddha asks us to check up, not to follow anything just because I said so. Nothing. There's no such thing as blind faith. You check it up. And if you can prove it wrong, throw it out. Now, most of the things we can't prove wrong, we just don't understand. So I say, put it on the back burner. Just leave it there, and what you can, work with what we can. And just say, oh, well, fair enough. I don't understand that one yet. Don't close the door on it. So the first truth said, there is suffering. I did get that far. Birth, aging, sickness, death. And this root we call all pervasive suffering. So no matter what conditions you're born with, where you're born and whatever, there's this sort of sense of dissatisfaction, discontent, dis-ease, right? That we're never just content with what we have or with what we experience. Like, as Rob warned me, don't look at the weather forecast for the next week, and I did. Gets worse and worse and worse. See, I'm already discontent thinking about it. It just comes so easy, right? Oh, drama. Are we going to survive the next week? Summer has well and truly hit. Okay, so there are all these things that, cause us to not be so content. And it happens all the time. And then the Buddha said, well, actually, there are causes for that. And the two main causes, one is called karma. I'm sure you've heard the word karma. Now, we don't use it in a negative sense of it's just your karma. It's not, there is positive karma and negative karma. It's not all bad. So every experience of joy we have, the Buddha would say, is our karma, which is a ripening of some virtue that we have done, something good we've done. And just think, the more we do good, the more we help out others, don't we feel better? I certainly do. But anyway, so the negative is what gives rise to all those disturbing states of mind, which in general are called delusions or afflictions. Delusions because they are deluded about reality. So if there's someone I don't like, I'm going to elaborate on top of this person in front of me. Oh, I don't like the way they speak, they dress, they walk, I put all this stuff on them. And yet they've got a loving family who do not see them in that way. So that there's no truth in that. It's just what I've projected onto that. And so this is where we need to take a step back and look at, well, actually, there's truth there. There is a person there. But they're not the person that I perceive to be there. They're not as I perceive them to be. Because if they were truly like that, everyone would perceive them like that. And that's not true. Even the worst people that can come to mind right now in the world, they have family, they have friends, they have followers, they have, whatever. Okay, fact. And then on the other side, as one of my friends said, because, someone will go, I love chocolate. And he says, you can't possibly love chocolate. Like you love people, you love animals. You don't love chocolate. You like it, you crave it, you want it, you desire it. But love, we're mixing ourselves up a bit. And so this Buddha said we're all a bit mixed up. We confuse things. So we're wanting to remove all of that. And that then leads to us, freaking out when the chocolate runs out or when whatever, or when we have a heat wave, or anything whatsoever. So they're what's called the first truth and the second truth. The truth is that we are suffering. Yes, we suffer aches, pains, grief, loss, separation, all of these things. But this level of ongoing dissatisfaction we're not aware of most of the time. It's sort of just there. And that's, the Buddha would say, is the one that gets us into trouble. But, it has its cause, and it has its causes mainly from these deluded states of mind that gets things wrong. So the Buddha called this our root ignorance. Our root ignorance that, and then this is where it is in the context of the Hindu teachings where the Buddha said we hold on to a sense of self that doesn't exist. We exist, and we do have a healthy sense of self. We don't get rid of that. But this one that says, I don't know, I am the most important person in the world. Well, we're all our most important person in the world, aren't we? Maybe if you've got kids, it changes. Does it? Maybe. I don't know either. I don't have kids either. Anyway, but this grasping at this me. Who is this me? So if I'm changing moment by moment, yes, there is a me, but it's every moment's a different me. We're reinventing ourselves all the time, we could think of. But this one that, I want to protect, or how dare you hurt me? I love you. This one, no, maybe the I love you will leave out. The one who's hurt, the one, how could you possibly blame me? Because after all, I'm blameless. All these ideas and elaborations we have about ourselves, the Buddha said, that's the one at the root, is the ideas we have about ourselves. And we have to get real, right? So he's not saying nihilism. He's not saying, oh, we don't exist. Of course we exist. I mean, I'm not here talking to myself, I hope. Hello. Thank you. I got some feedback. I feel reassured. Um, but it leads to everything else that causes us all our problems in life, all our difficulties in life, all our ways, different ways in which we suffer. It can be an amazing day, everyone else is blissed out, and you're in torment in your head. People suicide, you know, because it's where our minds can take us in very unhealthy ways. So we want to develop more and more our mental health. Basically, it's all about mental health, having the best, most amazing mental health. And hey, don't we all need that in the world today? You know, increasing mental health issues, increasing isolation issues, and so forth. Okay, I've talked for quite a bit. Why did you come here? What do you what do you want to know? Obviously, you're keen to know something. Don't feel put on the spot, but if there's any questions coming up.
Hi, my name's Simon.
Simon.
Yes, nice to meet you. I've got a question. What's the difference between consciousness and awareness?
Oh, yeah.
And because we got taught in ninjutsu, my sensei taught us that the moment of death, concentrate your awareness, present moment on your third eye with your breaths, and that way you enter consciousness, eternal consciousness. Is that correct?
We don't have that particular view.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad view. If you, at the moment of death, can focus your consciousness on anything, you're ahead of the game.
Mm.
And the only way that we could do that is by doing it now, right? You do that as part of your practice there. Yeah. So the more we develop that, like from a Buddhist point of view, I mean, if you want the Buddhist point of view about death, and again, this has been through personal experience, not mine. I haven't had a near-death experience or anything like that, but the Buddhas and many beings since then who actually have control over death. So we have beings like the Dalai Lama who recognized reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama and just, how does all that work? It works because they can control that process. How can they control that process? Because they've worked with them. So should we die a natural death? These different stages of the death process happen, well, they can still happen quickly. But if you have a sudden death, they'll happen, you'll be dead before you even know you've died, you know, dying. Whereas we know some people are in that palliative state even for years. But in any case, there are things that are observable which are in relation to the body. So we observe that the body shrinks, don't we? And that, like this, what's it called? Elasticity, thank you, goes. So if you pinch the skin just stays up. So you're drying up. So in Buddhism, we talk about this as the different elements. The earth element in the body is the first one. We said to dissolve, or first of all, weaken, and then cease to function. So this is like, say when you're falling asleep and you feel a sense of heaviness, or you might feel that, you know, when we have that sort of drop feeling, these are similar to what happens when we're dying, where there's the heaviness of the body. Some people who have a near-death experience can, you know, I was visiting one woman who was palliative for 3 years. I went to visit her when they said she had 3 days to live, and she lived for 3 years. So I got to know her quite well. I knew her family. But sometimes you'd go in, and because they thought, oh, we thought we're going to lose her on the weekend. And in talking to her, say, you know, she definitely had that sense of heaviness or feeling being buried under the earth, that sort of feeling, right? Now, when we fall asleep, we don't generally have that, but our body gets heavier, and along with that, our eyes get blurry. You know, when you're telling yourself, I'm still awake, but you're eyes are going all blurry. And then it's difficult to open and close your eyes. So that's also what happens at the time of death, that you can't, your vision goes along with that. Right? You can't see things very clearly. So that's like we call the first stage. And then the second stage is when, and this contributes to the shrinking as well, or the water element dries up in the body, your saliva, blood thickens. And you see that if people have that bag and all the liquids in it get thicker and thicker and thicker. Your urine, whatever, everything dries up, the tear ducts. And, I was fortunate to have been with my mother as she was going through this process. And it took me a while to cotton on that her mouth was really dry, and to get, those little squeezy things with swabs and put it in her mouth. I put it in her mouth, and the jaw, she hadn't moved for days, but the jaw just clamped down because there was moisture. She wasn't letting it go. Poor mother. But anyway, she wasn't aware of that. So that sort of sense of the moisture dries up, and at the same time your hearing goes as well. And your body shrinks, becomes more brittle. So these, if you were around people in that phase, I mean, let's face it, as we get older, those things happen as well. Everything doesn't work anymore. And, more wrinkles come and all that sort of thing. But it's very dramatic at the death time. I think I remember this one woman who I was visiting, and like her body seemed to shrink so tiny. And then, so the water element, and then what we call the fire element, which is the warmth in the body goes. So when the warmth in the body goes, it contracts from the extremities into into the center of the body, center of the chest. And then, your breathing gets very labored. It's that stage where somebody breathes in and you wonder if they're ever going to breathe out again. No, breathe out and you wonder if they're ever going to breathe in. That's right, breathe out. Like again with my mother, one of my brothers and I were both there at the time when she took her last breath. So she took this breath, and then my brother, indicated to me that she'd stop breathing. And then he said, just wait a minute. And there was one more breath. So there was one more breath, and there weren't any more breaths. So it becomes very labored, or people have that, what we call it, death rattle. Different people do different things. So, I mean, it can happen differently. So and then the air element, which is your actual breath, stops, right? So at that stage, your heart stops, brain waves stop, and that's when you're medically generally declared dead, correct? Medical scientists here. However, from a Buddhist perspective, because remember, the body's it ceased to function, so the body is dead. But this is where, from the mind point of view, the mind is still functioning. And within Buddhism, we understand that the mind is still functioning until all that heat leaves the body. And we say that's when the subtle level of consciousness. So you can stay focused on your breath, but what happens? Oh, no, you weren't focusing on your breath, you're focusing here. Yeah. So stay focusing there. Because if you focus on your breath, what happens when the breath stops? Yeah, focus there. So that's okay. So, so we talk about these different levels of mind, like I mentioned earlier, more subtle levels of mind. And if somebody has control over that death process, when it comes to the state where the body ceases functioning but the mind's still functioning, they can keep that light of awareness on. and they can engage in their spiritual practices. And when they finish that, that's when all the heat goes, and then all the natural decaying of the body, rigor mortis and the pooling of the blood and caca, all that happens, right? So then the body's really decaying. And the Dalai Lama is very interested in this, and they've been documenting that. There was one Lama in New Zealand. There's been others where they're actually filming that process of those who can keep the light on. Because while they do that, the body is still fresh. So if we're open to the idea, purely by observation, to be able to see, it's not quite certain where the time of death in terms of clinical death, yes, it's very clear. That's very clear. Because even once that mental consciousness has left, so all the sense consciousnesses are finished. They're finished when the body finishes. But the mental consciousness, and we're talking a very, very subtle level of mind. Right? If you have control over that, you can use that to have very, very deep, subtle meditation at that time. So yeah, go for it. Go for it. And why is it important? Well, what's important is at the time of death, regardless if anyone has any control over anything, because just watch when you're falling asleep, you try and keep the light of awareness on and see how far you get. I'm a total failure, really. It's just like, no, I'd rather just be asleep, thank you. I don't want to keep the light of awareness on. There are practices like that. And I'm like, but I want to sleep at night. I don't want to be awake watching my sleeping. Thank you. But these beings that have control, they can finish some spiritual practice or another. Oh, yes, why it's important. What's important at the time of death is that our mind is as peaceful as possible, whatever's going to make that as peaceful as possible. So they say don't have people around the dying person who are going to disturb them or whatever, that they had a fight with them, they're in conflict with or whatever. I think we naturally seem to do this, as my observation, that people naturally want to keep it quiet. I'm talking about when you're in a slow dying process and being respectful and so forth like that. So, and as a Buddhist, I'm often called to funerals and not funerals, yes, that as well, but to, when people are dying. And, if they're Christian, you do the Christian prayers. If they're whatever, if they want it, whatever they want. If they don't want anything, they don't want anything. It's not up to us to decide what's most helpful for them at that time of death. It's what's most comfortable for them. Of course, we make them physically comfortable, but we also want to make them mentally comfortable. And we want that for ourselves as well. So is that enough about death? No, Mark?
It's not very beautiful how the body knows how to die.
The body knows how to die. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Buddha would say we've died many times. Unfortunately, we just don't remember it. So we don't know. We think we don't know. Well, our living person doesn't know how to die. But the body itself, if we just get out of the way. Yeah.
So my question relates, and this is something I've been trying to resolve, I think, for years now.
Give it a go.
Is voluntary assisted dying
yes.
becoming more common?
Yeah.
10 years ago, I thought that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
But I see it's changed the more I study that.
Yeah.
There's an important necessary process to die.
Okay. And it's
comment?
Yes, I can comment. There's a few comments there. So before getting into the voluntary assisted dying, just to be clear, as Buddhists, we use all the medical assistance available, right? So we have technologies now that certainly weren't around at the time of the Buddha. As I said, I wanted to know what medical technologies they had, that he didn't see any sickness and aging. And I mean, did they have Botox? But yeah, we do avail ourselves of all that. So from a Buddhist perspective, and it comes back to this idea of karma, that we don't know somebody's karma. So we talk about, you know, coming back to the time of death, at the time of death, that how your mind is at that time of death, and that's why we want the mind to be as most peaceful as possible, is that determines what we say your throwing karma, the karma of your next rebirth, what conditions you're born into. No, sorry, not the conditions you're born into, your lifespan of your next life, right? So there's sort of a sense of a predicted lifespan, like the Dalai Lama says, it's predicted I will live to 113, right? He will live to 113. And yet, I mean, I immediately think, what does a 113-year-old body looks like? But so far, he's 90 this year, so he's going okay. But he has got very, very good medical support. So there's sort of like a predicted, that doesn't mean that your existence could be cut short by a accident or whatever. But we want to have the best possible rebirth. And of course, this assumes that one has to at least keep our minds open to the idea of rebirth, so that itself can be a qualm for people, like, is there a next life? There have been the studies done, you know, Professor Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker did extensive studies of kids, different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic circumstances, different countries, and who remembered their immediate past life up until about 7, and then it sort of like fades. So it's interesting that they, you know, just ordinary kids, we're not talking anybody who's worked a lot on their mind or anything, and they've been verifiable. Okay. Just to say that there's a lot we don't know. So the karma of your next rebirth also means that karma of the length of your lifespan. And we don't know what that is. So if we were doing voluntary assisted dying, it would be like we're interrupting that lifespan. And as Buddhists, anyone a vet? We're not popular with vets either for the same reason. Because we don't want to deliberately shorten the life of any being, because that's killing. And I know legally it's not killing. Believe me, I know. I mean, I just had a couple of Buddhist friends who attended a friend of theirs voluntary assisted dying, or was it assisted? He did it all himself. Anyway, he did it all himself. And so they're his friends and they're Buddhist, and they didn't say, I'm not coming because I'm Buddhist and I don't believe in that. Like, you know, you still assist where possible. But why we wouldn't ever promote it is because we don't know the karma of that person or that animal or whatever. Yes, they're suffering, there's no doubt about that, right? But because there's another life, we say that sometimes it's just we don't know whether it's, and only a Buddha would know, whether it's better that they, if you like, experience that suffering in a human life and don't take it into a future existence where they might be in some really hellish existence. For example, Gaza. You know, I'm not saying those, you know, people, whatever. It's complicated. I'm just trying to give an example of what would be a hellish existence on this earth, and that's pretty much what I I reckon is a pretty hellish existence when you see all the malnourished babies, and you know the picture. So we don't want to intervene in that process because we don't know that being's karma, but we will use every medical condition available to us because they're the conditions for supporting life. Everything but actually facilitating death in any circumstance. So this is why the vets don't like it. We say this poor animal is suffering. Yes, they're suffering, but we think they might be suffering more. And just to, I see your hand, just to give one example, when I was a couple of decades ago now, which I'm going to tell this story, I think it was yesterday and it wasn't, well, it is fading in my memory. So I came back from India. I ended up in hospital with pneumonia, very bad pneumonia. And at the same time, this High Lama was visiting Australia, and I was, poor pity me, I'm in hospital and I'm not with him. And I got the message from him that it's better to experience that suffering now in this body, in this life, than to experience it in some future life in hot hells. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll take the suffering now, but not too much. And you don't think like that. You just want this suffering to end. And we're always like that. We just want this suffering to end. But there might be a worse suffering if you don't just sort of complete that suffering now. And because we don't know, it could go either way. Unless we could dial a Buddha, say, hey, could you? I mean, if we could, we would, wouldn't we? We do have lamas that we ask questions about in these areas where we have no idea ourselves. It's just we're not there yet to know. So, yeah, we don't interfere with somebody's lifespan, basically. Yes.
And is this also linked up with the idea that suffering is suffering?
Yes, that's the idea. That was the point. That some in that process, some negative karma gets burnt up. And so that's why you don't have to experience in some worse situation in a future life.
Then when I was caring for my disabled husband and he had a lot of pain, when I went to Buddhism one night and heard that, I was so excited. And I came back and I told him, and he was so thrilled because his pain had seemed meaningless. Now he realised that, oh, I'm burning up my negative karma.
It helps. It helps if you have that point of view, but generally we don't publicize that point of view. It just is what the Buddha taught. But then there has to be a lot of other teachings around that to even accept that, because even to accept rebirth.
Oh, I think he was hoping to be born again.
Yeah, well, it's good to plan where you want to be born again. Whatever your belief is. I mean, I grew up Catholic, so I designed in my head my room in heaven, right? As a little kid, I designed my room in heaven, assuming I was going to get to heaven. According to the nuns, I was going the other way. That was their study, because I asked questions and I realized, oh, you're supposed to be in Tibetan Buddhism. You're supposed to ask questions here. It's just in the wrong place. Yeah. So, as I said, there's a lot of teachings around all of that to try and get it so that we can make some sense of that. I mean, karma itself is a huge topic. And again, the Buddha said only a Buddha really knows karma. But we do get that if we do a positive thing, we get a positive result. But we think, well, not always I don't. Is it? I don't always get a positive result. But the Buddha is thinking eons, not just literally this week, month, year, eons. But, if you study hard, you're going to get that result. Of course, the Australian Open's on. They train hard, they get the result. Or they don't, actually. You can be crushed out in the first round, even the best player in the world.
Buddha think time and space was an illusion?
No.
No?
Time and space, not so much an illusion. So time is a construct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's you know, we have, like, when I was in Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, you talk about Melanesian time, right? Yeah.
I say that because three practical times in my life, I've come off a motorbike.
Yes.
And I've heard myself when time and space stopped, which seemed like time stopped.
Yes.
I had some DMT once, and time stops. And the third one was, it was in a fight once, and I got what's called Mushin, which is the principles of Zen. And that's when you're that focused on the present moment in a life or death situation, time stops.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked, did Buddha believe in time and space as an illusion?
Not as an illusion, but but not denying such experiences.
Yeah.
So I've had that experience once. I mean, I've had it a couple of times, but one time when I was similar to you with the accident coming off your bike, that I was on a freeway and I think I must have skid out on tire rubber, and I flew through the air. I saw my life and the life of everyone else in the cars around flash in front of me, went flying through the air and ended up, fortunately, not on a concrete barrier, but in the one area where there was grass, flipped around, turning the other direction. And I had that experience as well, that sort of sense of time stopped.
Mm.
Time stopped. And even when it didn't come back with a jolt, you know, came back and I thought, okay, first of all, I'm intact. Surely the cars are not, and I got out and everything was intact. It was sort of like it didn't happen.
Yes, weird experience.
But it did happen because somebody came and checked if I was okay. But fortunately, nobody was hurt. Yeah, it is a weird experience. But I used to, back in the day, do improv theatre, and we'd do the theatre sports. I don't know if you had it over here. I was over east. And you work as a team. And we were doing really well this night. And that was that same experience, that time just...
Is it like being in the zone?
It's in the zone, being in the zone, yeah.
That sort of...
Yeah. Peak experience, whatever, yeah. But being in the zone, whatever, that feeling, it's like you're suspended in time, isn't it? Time suspended, yeah. So, but that's where, I mean, time is it is a construct. It doesn't mean it exists, but, and we can agree because, you know, I don't know, Big Ben or somebody decides what time it is. Was it Greenwich Mean Time? And then everything else gets calculated accordingly. But that's a conventional idea of time, whereas our experience of time can change very much. Like over the Christmas New Year period, I was running a retreat where we were in silence. And when you're in silence, there seems to be so much more time. Because you're in silence, you're not filling the space. And it's a very interesting experience that you know, it's just like, oh, time's going really slow.
Go start work.
Exactly. And then we talk about time flying. So everyone has that experience of different, you know, so we try and make it this sort of, now it's 2:15. But, you know, I find it hilarious in this place because every clock will tell you a different time.
Yeah.
So which one do you want to go by? Yeah. So time, space itself, space is a dimension of existence. So there's two levels of space, I suppose. One is like we have the space in this space, which is everything that's not occupied by something physical.
Like a lack of obstruction.
Well, the technical term is lack of obstruction. So space is defined, like Buddhism defines everything, is lack of obstruction, right? But then we have this concept also of uncompounded space. So, yeah. I mean, we talk about spatial awareness, don't we? Anyway, there's a lot around space as well. So we wouldn't say how we relate to it can be very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. How we experience it can be very different, time and space. Yeah.
Also, sorry, does anyone else want to ask any questions?
You kickstart everyone else.
My Cambodian friend at work, he recommended this place for me, and he told me all about the Heart Sutra and the Lotus Sutra. Which one was written first?
I can't say. Actually, I think it was the Lotus Sutra. Oh no, written, because there are two different things. One is when things were written down, but when the discourse is given. So the Heart Sutra is short for the Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So there were three. The Buddha taught, we say, three turnings of the wheel. The first one was these Four Noble Truths. Only got up to number 2. So the third truth is that we can be free of all suffering, all dissatisfaction, all disturbances of the mind, everything. We can be free of that. The truth of cessation of our afflicted states of mind, our deluded states of mind, and so forth. Everything unhealthy of the mind. And that's what we call nirvana, peace, abiding in that space, which I did make reference to. And then the fourth truth, the fourth noble truth is, well, how do I get that? How do I achieve that? So step by step. So the analogy is used like a doctor. A doctor, like the Buddha's the doctor. The Buddha gives the diagnosis. Oh, you're suffering, you're dissatisfied, you're discontent. You don't have to be that way. You can be you can experience genuine, ongoing happiness and take this medicine, which is then called the Dharma. So that's all the teachings of the Buddha. So that's the analogy that's used there. So that's the first turning, the first major teaching. The second one is on these Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And so that one is all about how things exist and how we get wrong that things exist and how to get it right. And the Heart Sutra, it's called the Heart Sutra because it's the shortest, it's sort of like the essence, the heart, the core of all those 80,000 teachings on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And one of the big teachings on that is called Ornament of Clear Realizations, and it was taught by Maitreya. So this is Maitreya here. This is the coming Buddha, the next Buddha to come. But at the time, he was a disciple of Shakyamuni Buddha. Right? Yeah. So I believe that the Lotus Sutra came, I'm dragging my memory because we don't so much focus on the Lotus Sutra here, but I seem to recall that it came before the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Yeah. But given that it all was within a 45-year span of the Buddhist teachings, he taught for 45 years. So a long span of time.
There's a lot of history, isn't it? A lot of history.
Lot of history, yeah. So, you start, this is what my experience, if you're interested in dipping a toe into Buddhism, and obviously you're interested enough to come along, is that, you think, oh, I'm getting all this. And then there's more, and then there's more, and then there's more, and then there's more. It seems never ending. But really, the essence is getting, some sense of control of our mind. In other words, what has kept me coming back all these years is that my life's become better for it, my mind's become better for it, and I see that continuing. Even I know, I could be doing more, I could do all the negative things we tell ourselves, but in general, it's just like, if we're living more in sync with reality, it seems that things flow more, that we're not up against it all the time. You know, feel like you're bashing your head against a brick wall, so forth. So anything else? Other questions, comments? So again, we don't use the word soul. I understand what you mean. I grew up Catholic, right? I also had my image of my soul. I guess we all did. Are you Catholic or grow up Catholic or Christian or nothing? Yeah. Yeah. So what's your idea of soul for a start?
The true essence of being one that's not your physical body.
Okay.
Goes on.
Okay. So we call that this subtle level of mind. So as part of this death process, when the subtle levels of mind are closing down, ceasing to function, we have what is called a very subtle body and a very subtle mind. A very subtle body is a wind energy, just wind. And it's sort of said to be the support for this very subtle level of mind. At a very subtle level of subconscious, like we're extremely subtle. They say that we also experience that subtle level of mind when we faint, when we sneeze, when we die, and when you have orgasm. But it seems that we can't grab any of those to go, hold on a minute, I just want to hold that experience a bit longer. It seems, doesn't it? Mid-faint, mid-sneeze, mid-orgasm, mid-death. Hold on a minute, I want to grab this one. That seems to tap into that very subtle level of mind. But it's what we're also trying to access when we meditate, to get to more and more subtle levels of the mind. So what you call soul, what I call subtle consciousness, we can say in your description is the same thing. Right? And at some point, so when everything closes down, everything becomes very quiet, but at some point this very subtle wind energy moves, and that moves the mind. The mind moves out of the body, and that those two together become the basis to form, to be part of, to be correct, your next life, right? So we have this intermediate state, which is called the bardo, just means intermediate state, between this life and the next life. And that intermediate state can be anything up to 49 days. So when someone dies and we're asked to pray for them, we do those prayers for 49 days because we don't know in which point in that they take rebirth. So what it said is, say, again, this subtle level of consciousness is not impeded by anything because it's not material. It's not physical. The only thing that obstructs it is the womb of your future mother. Next life. And so we say that my very subtle mind goes towards, say, this couple over here having sex, and my mind is attracted, right, into that, either to the father or to mother or whatever, somehow is attracted. And the coming together of the sperm and the ovum and your subtle level of consciousness is what makes existence. So we have the physical aspect coming from the parents, but this mental aspect is our own. That's how it's said. A lot of investigation to be had there, isn't it? But, you know, being one of 6 kids and all of us, let's say we're not all the same. My mother in particular wanted to not treat us all the same, but to treat us all equally, which meant treating us all differently because we were different personalities. So we had the same mum and dad, we had the same conditions, all of that. I mean, just look at your own families and kids and whatever. Even like I've got nieces and nephews that are twins. They're very different. The twins are very different to each other, not just physically, personality-wise. And so the Buddha would say, well, that's because you brought your personality or your mind with all your habits and tendencies and interests and karma into that life. So we say, for example, that Mozart was good at music, a child prodigy. How do you get good at something? You practice. So if the practice wasn't in that life, it must have been in a previous life. Right? We also say that Hitler got very good at killing. It was probably a killing machine in the previous life. Not necessarily as a human. Could have been a whale chomping gazillions of beings for breakfast.
Crocodile.
A crocodile. Could have been anything, right? We don't know. But if we're good at something and we didn't do it in this life, then we must have done it in a past life to be good at that. And that's what we say comes with us on our mental continuum, on our mind. So we call it mind, maybe soul, mind. You might think, therefore I think soul's different, I'm not sure.
So that subtle energy going into the next life,
yeah,
the karmic imprint follows, doesn't it?
It's on that.
Yeah.
It's sort of somehow within that subtle energy.
So if you've done bad in this life, you say you've done really bad, you know, you're a drug dealer or whatever, that follows you to the next.
Except we can work with our mind, right? And the Buddha said, no matter what we've done, what bad things we've done, killing, drugging, whatever, drug dealing, whatever, we have practices which we call purification practices to purify that negative karma before it ripens. So we use the analogy of like there's a seed. That's the karmic imprint, a seed. Now, if I don't give it the soil, if it doesn't meet with the soil, the sunshine, the water, it's not going to grow, right? So if while that's still a seed, still an imprint on my mind, work to be rid of that, to purify that, then I can be free. As the Buddha said, anything that we've ever done, there's nothing that can't be purified.
Yeah, right.
Nothing. And I've spent a lot of years visiting people in prison, you know, who are Buddhists and have asked for us to visit, who have done bad things. That's why they're in prison. But they want to use that time they're in prison to turn their lives around because they know it's possible. And they do. It is possible. So we don't have to just wait there and, you know, so karma literally means action. So it can also mean the action that you take to, if you like, neutralize it, you know, to zap it out of existence. But, yeah, and so, you know, we have daily practices that we do, or sometimes like at Easter time, we've got a retreat, which is exactly that, purification practices. So we do an intense period of that, of one of those practices. There's many different practices to do to purify our mind, because, you know, this is the whole intent of Buddhism, is to get rid of all that negativity.
Is that like a special meditation or?
Yes. Yeah. And particularly within Tibetan Buddhism, you'll find that there's a lot of using visualization, right? And so particularly in relation to that, like over here, we've got, this is Mother Tara, said to be the mother of the Buddhas. And so also the one in the middle, the main green Tara, I call her action woman. Like you know, she's swift liberator to help us swiftly to do whatever we need to do. And then we have, don't know if you can see up here, this one, he's got a sword, which is the sword of wisdom. Now, we're a non-violent lot. It's representing that wisdom has to cut through our rubbish. Always think of like, is it Prince and Sleeping Beauty, cutting through. It's cutting through the rubbish of our mind. So he is the Buddha of wisdom, although wisdom is also presented in female form, Prajnaparamita, in the Heart Sutra. The mother of wisdom, right? And then we have over here is Chenrezig, got a lot of arms, 1,000 arms, Buddha of compassion. So most within Tibetan Buddhists would, even though we see the Dalai Lama, we see a monk, we say he is actually the Buddha of compassion in the world today. That's what he stands for, is compassion in the world. So we have different ones for different practices, and to focus on developing those different qualities which are innate to us, our positive qualities. Develop our, and Maitreya Buddha, the coming Buddha, is the Buddha of love and kindness. So I just wish you hurry up and get here. Yeah. So we do different practices with each one of those. So we'd say, yes, there's one Buddha. Historically, we recognize Shakyamuni Buddha, but in fact, there's Buddhas everywhere. There's not one Buddha. So it comes back to, it's not just one God. Even in Hinduism, we had more than one God, one deity. But that it's all about, really what the Buddha said is, I can't do it for you. I can only show you the way. I can't plant my realizations into you. I can't purify your minds of all the negativity. You have to do it, but I can tell you how. And then the rest is up to you. And so the Buddha is basically saying, you're the boss of your own mind. You work with your mind. And if it works for you, keep doing it. But he also said there's 84,000 paths to enlightenment, which is more than all the faiths, religions, spiritualities, whatever people have come up with so far that we can name. So we're all going to get to the same place. It's just, how long we take.
Sure.
Okay. Any questions unanswered? I'm trying a different tactic now. Okay, so if you want to know more, we have Rob can show you the program. We have teachings on Friday mornings and Sunday mornings. We have meditation here on Sunday morning and Tuesday morning. And the second week in February, we've got a visiting Lama. So he comes, he's from our original monastery in Nepal, Kopan Monastery, but he spends at least half the year these days in America, in a centre in America. But he will be, we get to see him about every 2 years now because he's too busy. And he's coming, and he's a really wonderful teacher. So he'll be teaching over that weekend. I'm looking at the flyers out there. So he's very good. I'd recommend coming along for that. The teachings that we have tomorrow morning, it's called Discovering Buddhism. I lead that one. We're up to Introduction to Tantra, which is sort of like jumping into the deep end of the pool, but hey, it depends what your karma is. What am I doing on the Friday morning? 3 Principles of the Path, that's right. So that's a sort of another introductory teaching on the Friday morning. So they're the main teachings that we have. We have this centre here. We've got another one in Bunbury, Tara Meditation Centre. So myself and Venerable Paker go up and down between these two. We have a library, and what else? So we're part of this organisation, FPMT, which is a big mouthful, Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. So I said there was like Theravada and Mahayana. So this is for worldwide for the preservation of the Mahayana tradition. And so we've got a lot of free books because we have in America, Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives. Lama Yeshe was our founder. And there's a lot of teachings online, but also available here in physical form as free books. You can get a lot online and you can get a lot here to read more. And I'd encourage you to, try out coming to some teachings if that's, if you're interested in finding out more. If you're satisfied with today, that's fine too. So we can, yes.
I know at least one person uses FIFO.
Yeah.
So how can people?
We have Zoom.
Okay, that would be the
Yeah.
way to go.
Yeah, we have Zoom. Rob's our IT person, so he can help you with that. So maybe we want to sort of just break in here and if you want to have a cuppa or continue just having conversation out there. Happy with that?
Thank you for your teaching.
Thank you for coming along today. Thank you for all your questions. We love questions.
Cheers.
And it's how, usually when someone has a question, it benefits everybody. So we all benefit. Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's go. If you want a cuppa or we've got some poppers if you want something.
I mean, I want to donate to the temple. How do you do that?
See Rob. Everything you have a question about, see Rob. Good to see you. Is that what happened?
But it was lovely.
Yeah. But you must have it to be
Oh, good. That's good.
You've answered the question.
This is that nice and possible.
Yes.
Go. Well, yeah.